Hey, and welcome on in. It is the first edition, the first installment of a new program, a new feature that we're giving you here on Claibs Online. It is Lunch with Claibs and Joe. I am Joe Roderick. Of course, that is Mike Claiborne here with you across Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're everywhere, Claibs, and that's what we've been trying to do over the last 2 months now.
Yeah, now we got to figure out what we're going to have for lunch. If we're going to do this, we have to do it right. So, what are you having for lunch today?
Right now, I had a big breakfast. I went and ran 6 miles this morning and had a big breakfast. So now
Uh,
probably have a little bit of a later lunch. But I'm trying. You know what? I'm trying to drop some more. I'm down about 15 pounds so far in quarantine. So I'm still trying to knock out about 10 more. So
I'm down about 3 to 5 in quarantine. I've just been just working on weights and trying to figure out, because all the gyms are closed, so you have to find your own ways to do weightlifting and training and stuff like that. So, but I'm just trying to put on a little bit more muscle at this point.
yeah, and you've I mean you that's what you've been doing over the last year or so. Is
This is
I mean, if
2 years, 2 years in July. But that running stuff you can have, man. I've got no. I'll ride with you. Be right next to you all the way down the street. No running happening here. Now I'm a walker. I will walk all day. But that running thing, you get sweaty and all in a hurry.
I'm set this weekend to have Julia Conan on my show on my podcast. Yeah, she I think top 10 Olympic qualifying distance runner, and she's constantly just posting miles. I think believe went to high school with your daughter.
Yeah, and the Carter Word Academy, the Athlete Factory. Not only do they have great basketball, but Julia was a great track champion as well, long distance runner, and they've had some other great sports over there. And I can't wait to see her in the Olympics. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah,
And
we'll talk running with
ballpark.
her, and it'll probably humble me a bit with how many miles that she puts in every
Don't race her. Don't race her. That's all I'm going to suggest to you. Don't race her.
So, as you can see on the side of the screen, we have a huge list of topics that we're going to get to over the next several. We don't have a set time. I mean, we're on the internet. We got nothing to do, nowhere to be. So we're just going to sit here and talk with you about a number of things. But we do want to let people know about all of the other stuff that we have available up on Claibs Online and some of the other stuff that we've been doing. As Claibs, you were a busy man last week with some of the interviews that you had with Mike Milbury, with Dr. Rick Lehman, with Clarence Gaines Jr., with Jeremy Rutherford. So you were knocking those out every day last week, along with some of the other interviews and the This Day in History, Cardinal History that we're doing every day. So there's something for everybody that we've been putting up online on Claibs Online every single day over the past 2 months.
Yeah, and this week's going to be more fun. Talk a little baseball this week with Derek Gould. I'm going to go to music route here a little bit. Got a couple of friends with the Doobie Brothers and Hall and Oates, and talk to them about what are they doing now. The industry. We're always used to concerts and stuff, and a lot of these guys are just starting to go out on the road. As a matter of fact, and I'm anxious to get Mark Russo, saxophonist from the Doobie Brothers. They had to cut their tour short because Tom Johnston had come up with something. One of the original members of the Doobie Brothers, they were in Vegas and they had to cut the concert short just before COVID-19 was well known. And now, as they're doing some backtracking, maybe COVID-19 was here a little earlier than some people suspected. So I'm looking forward to talking to him. But the other question is, Joe, a lot of these guys are at an age where they're touring, they're in their late 60s and 70s, and then you have the Stones. That's a whole nother discussion. How are they going to treat touring, or will they go back out on tour as they could run the risk of incurring some sort of, more serious issue with respect to health? So we're going to talk to them. Clarence Gaines Jr. is going to join us, and we'll talk about the Last Dance. The final chapters were installed last night, and we got a few other surprises up our sleeves for this week. So we invite everybody to just keep checking us out. We like to have a lot of fun stuff out there, a lot of things to talk about. Even if we're not playing games, we found ways to do things. And believe it or not, we won't have one list. I think I'm listed out.
I have a few things that I'm working on as well. Nothing that I can announce just yet, but I have a few for the weekend that I'm trying to go away from the mainstream sports routes for things. So we'll keep in touch about those as the week goes on. We want to make sure we mention our sponsors here for Claibs Online. Of course, Ameren UE and Munganast St. Louis Acura, two of our fine sponsors that we have here that bring you the features such as this day in Cardinals history each and every day. And I do want to let people know ahead of time, tomorrow's This Day in Cardinal History, we have some really classic audio. We have a Cardinal call, Mike, from 1962 that people will be able to hear tomorrow on this day in Cardinal history. The Cardinals were nice enough to send us some of the greatest highlights in the organization's history, and you'll be able to hear Harry Carey on a call from
Hey,
1962 tomorrow.
looking forward to that. And you and I were talking about the fact that people your age remember Harry near the end of the trail. I grew up listening to him, and he was flawless as a broadcaster, especially his tour duty with the Cardinals in the '60s. I was really young then, but man, if you listen to some of his calls, not only was there a lot of excitement, but he was truly a radio guy as far as his description of what was going on around him. Kind of like John Rooney. Whenever you hear John Rooney give the descriptions from everything from the uniforms to the way the ballpark's set up, Harry was as good as anybody in doing that.
Well, let's get to our rundown here, Claibs. As you can see on the side, we will get to the last dance. We'll get to some of your conversations that you've had with Clarence Gaines over the past 4 weeks. But we actually had live sports on TV yesterday, as NBC hosted a two-on-two golf match live from Seminole Golf Course down in Florida that saw Dustin Johnson and Rory McIlroy taking on Ricky Fowler, and Matthew Wolff was the fourth guy in that mix. Before we get into any of this, I know I saw Jay Randolph Jr., who's played just about everywhere in the world. He's posted that he has never played at Seminole. You have been fortunate enough to be on the course there at Seminole. So I want to ask first, what we saw on TV yesterday, did it do the course justice in your mind for what they showcased it as?
I don't really think so. It's a beautiful course. There's a lot of sand, a whole lot of sand. It's right there on the ocean. And there's these walls of trees that sometimes kind of knocks the wind down, but there are some other areas where it doesn't. So the wind changes basically between each stroke you take. It's a tough course, man. It's a really tough course. Donald Ross built it. God, that course has got to be 70, 80 years old now. But it's a very nice course, maybe one of the best courses I've ever had a chance to play on.
When did you have a chance to get out there?
This is like 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago. I was supposed to play, ironically, supposed to play like that following. I left Jupiter on the 15th of March. I think I was set to play on the 18th. So it's a very impressive course. The unfortunate thing about it though yesterday, Joe, was because we're used to seeing more camera angles and more things on the course to give us an idea. I know they were limited as far as what they could actually bring out there, but it almost reminded you of an amateur event, or if you had a relative or somebody you were following, because you just didn't have a lot of camera angles to follow the ball. Throw in the fact that if you didn't have the tracker, when that ball was going up into the daylight, it was hard to pick up. So I wish it would have done a little bit better job at that. But considering the circumstances, anything is better than nothing.
And it gave us more access though to the golfers, as
Yeah.
all four guys were mic'd up and they're talking the whole time, even though they did keep their distance from each other, and that probably took away a little bit of what we could have seen. It still it kind of showed you the competitiveness that those guys have when they're probably just out playing around together just for fun.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you, but I was surprised. And granted, it's network TV. Because when I play golf with guys like that, there's a whole lot more cussing going on. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of things. I didn't think the trash talk was there like I expected to be with Phil and Tiger and Brady and Peyton Manning coming up next week. I'm looking forward to seeing that, and maybe there'll be a little bit more trash talking, and maybe there'll be a few more side bets along the way as well. You know, it's a really awkward situation to wire a guy because he's got to be careful what he says. He doesn't want to come across as some kind of jerk, or maybe he drops an F bomb or something. You know, you got to just be careful. So the fact that they've never been wired like that before probably was one of the reasons why they were a little bit apprehensive.
And those guys are all still young too. I mean, they have
Yeah,
years of endorsement deals in front of them that they're trying to get. Where those four that we'll see this upcoming weekend, I think that's passed them by. You know, they have all the endorsement deals, they have all the money in the world, and nothing that they say on
most
live TV is going to affect any of that.
not going to lose anything if they do what they do. So I'm looking forward to watching it. I hope they have better camera setups where you can really track the ball. And you know, I don't know who the announcers were for this particular event. I'm not that familiar with them, but I kind of felt they were at a disadvantage as well. So hopefully we'll have some more on-site people there and they can track it and
You got to see them in
follow that.
shorts. You got to see them playing in shorts, and I have seen many professional golfers on social media saying that they looked professional, they looked good in their shorts yesterday, and maybe that's something the PGA can look at in the future is maybe getting rid of the slacks rule.
Well, you know what I think would be more appropriate? I think you can probably have two tournaments a year, maybe three, maybe in the summer, especially, that you would have the option. I don't know if you want to do this totally, but I think you want to have some options where, all right, this is a short optional event that we're having, you know, something along that line. And I think one of the things you notice right off the bat, Joe, is how developed these guys are from the waist down. You know, you see where they get their power from. But I think overall, it wouldn't be a bad idea. One of the things about golf is I think because of its tradition, I think they kind of shoot themselves in the foot sometimes as far as not being willing to expand their scope and try and make themselves more attractive to younger people. If they do that, I think it probably opens up some new revenue and some new avenues for them as far as just fan interest. I didn't hear anybody complaining about it yesterday, that's for sure.
Moving on to the Last Dance. That's been appointment television for the last 5 weeks now. It's over. It's done. It left you, even though the story was told 22 years ago, it somehow left us all wanting more. You wanted to see, more footage from back then, and I think especially for me, somebody that grew up a Bulls fan. I was 12 years old, 13 years old when they won that final championship. It would have been really cool to see them go for number 7, have an opportunity for number 7. But just we'll get into episodes 9 and 10. But just overall, as a documentary of those 10 episodes, your thoughts on the way that was all laid out?
I was thoroughly impressed. It was hard to follow though for some people, you know, because they would go from one year to another, they'd back up and go back and try and set the table. That was a little challenging initially. But I think the reason why it was so good is because it was the first time we'd ever seen behind the curtain of a person of greatness like Michael Jordan. I think the closest thing we've ever seen to that is all the documentaries and books we read and seen about Muhammad Ali. No one has had that sort of access before. And I tip my cap to the person who came up with the idea to video so much in an era, Joe, when this wasn't even thought of. And to think that this footage had been sitting on a shelf for so long, and I haven't had a chance to visit with Jason Harry yet about how much or how many man hours it took for them to put this together and how many hours of video did they have? Because I think the toughest decision they had to make, and remember, they had 10 hours to do this. How many more hours could they have gone, you know, had somebody said, keep it going? So, I mean, it was a phenomenal event. I don't know if there's anybody out there right now that we would have such a passion to follow. I would say maybe Tiger, but I think more Tiger's personal life would not paint him in a favorable light. So that would be a little bit of a challenge. Um, I don't think he's had as much fun as Michael did. You know, some people would tell you Tiger can kind of be a little nerdy, if not cheap. So I'm not sure if it would convey in a favorable light, and certainly not in a 10-hour event like we saw with the Last Dance.
So yesterday, I enjoyed jumping back and forth. I was able to keep up with that, and I liked the way they ended up coming back and telling the story at the end of it. The first time that I actually had an issue with it and I was a little confused with it was last night because they went from the 98 Eastern Conference Finals to the 97 finals, to the 97 championship, back to, so they jumped back 11
Yeah.
months to go to that. And that was the first time where I looked at that and I had to keep asking myself, okay, are they in the 97 or the 98 finals? And that's because they played the same team both years. So I think
Yeah.
that was the first time that I was confused, and it took me a second to figure out where they were going with that. But in the end, you saw the story they were trying to tell. They were showing that Jordan wanted to get back to the finals again and beat the Jazz again. And the way that he just used motivation and found ways to motivate himself and drive himself. He some of the stuff, he was making up out of thin air just to motivate himself, but you saw how great of a competitor he was, and you just don't see that in sports.
No, I was amused by it. And you're right about the fact that he was looking for things to motivate him, like the guy from Utah who was guarding him, and he just said, "Yeah, he was on my list." You know, that's not a list you want to be on, but he needed some sort of motivation. And some guys, and I guess that's something that you and I'll never understand is what it takes to get to that level where it comes, I won't say easy to you, but you have a better ability to embrace things. And sometimes you need a little bit more of a challenge. And I think that that's what he was looking for. Uh, Calling him out is all you needed to do. And I'm a believer, Joe, that, when you hear about bulletin board material and all that, I don't think that applies to, I think maybe it applies to 1% of all the athletes who actually can go out and do something about it. And I think the rest of it is just for media types and fans. So, oh, you can't get those guys riled up. Well, it's hard to get everybody on the same page. I don't care what sport it is. But when you get an individual who can take over, that's a whole different story. And I just felt like in his manner of approach, that's the way it's always been for him. This isn't just some newly acquired taste for him. He felt like this is something that I can always go back to this and turn it up a notch if I need to.
You were around that Bulls team during that second three-peat. You were around them, and you've talked to Clarence Gaines Jr. about the breakdown, and I'm sure you're going to talk more with him this week about the breakdown of that team after the 98 season. We know now that we know, what happened in that 98-99 season. There was the lockout. It was shortened to 50 games. The Spurs ended up being the champions that year. Could the Bulls have beaten, what would that Bulls team in 98-99 would have looked like if Phil and if Michael would have come back?
Well, I think it would have depended on who else came back with him. I've said earlier, Michael Jordan played a whole lot of basketball in that period of time. And as he was getting older, you had to wonder when was the clock going to turn on him. And I wasn't sure. I thought the fact that Pippen had been dealing with some nagging injuries, Steve Kerr had given you everything he could give you. Rodman was moving in the other direction as far as his career. I'm just not sure if they would have been as much of a challenge as you would have thought. I don't know if they'd have got out of the Eastern Conference. Now, granted, the Knicks got to the finals as an AC, but who knows how things would have changed. I think had they faced San Antonio, they'd have had matchup problems up front with Duncan and Robinson for sure. They had a pretty good team, San Antonio did. So it would have been an interesting challenge for sure on how they would have matched up. But then again, the Bulls, when you look back at the championships that they won, they had various matchup challenges. I think Dennis Rodman talked about it before, matching up with Indiana, who was really long up front, and Reggie Miller was a guy you had to pay attention to. They had multiple scoring options, and they had a really deep bench. I didn't think the Bulls had a deep bench for a lot of reasons. And if you ever look at their roster and you say, whoa, how they win with this bunch? serviceable guys, but not guys who were difference makers, which is what made Michael even greater. The fact that he had to work with maybe a lesser talented team.
I just can't imagine Scottie Pippen for all we saw during the 10 hours of the issues with his contract would have come back for a 1 year deal with the Bulls again for less money because you go and you look at what he signed for with was it Houston? Was he traded to Houston after that?
Portland.
Portland. Okay, so then he went to Houston after that, and then back to the back to the Bulls. But what he was traded for in the deal that he signed,
Well, maybe it was Houston. I'm not sure. It was one of the two. But anyway,
he signed for a lot of money. That's plain and simple. He signed for a lot of
yeah,
money when he left the Bulls, and he was underpaid when he was with Chicago. I don't think he would have taken another year of being underpaid.
yeah, it probably would have gotten to him. Because I think what he probably would have argued, you know what, I'm one of the best players in the world on the best team in the world, and I'm not being paid close to either. So I understood why they did what they did. I know some people, how could you do it? You know, I think the hardest thing for a general manager is to decide when is it time. Now, remember, they didn't have anybody young that could step in and help fill the void. They didn't have any high draft choices. Free agency and the salary cap was really starting to have an impact on teams. So they were stuck to try and overpay for some guys one more year and then really be ass out probably wouldn't have worked. And I think that's one of the reasons why they did it. I'm not necessarily thinking it was the best idea. I know fans and the players obviously thought they would, but you know what, Joe? They would have had to have, in my opinion, a perfect storm.
And
Staying healthy, getting some breaks, finding someone that they didn't anticipate stepping up, and just making sure nobody got complacent after and going after a seventh championship. I think the plus factor was, as you mentioned, 50 games would have eased the burden somewhat. And this was an era when guys weren't taking nights off for rest, no maintenance night, I mean, that sort of foolishness. So it would have been challenging, but it may have been a little easier. But man, the dice to roll at that point would have been really big to roll. But when you look back on it, they haven't been back since. So maybe there was something to it.
Pippen was traded to Houston that year for Roy Rogers and a draft pick that ended up being Jake the Snake Voskuhl for, and then went there and signed a 5 year, $67 million deal with the Houston Rockets.
Roy Rogers was a really good rebounder, good tough player up front. He's an assistant coach in the NBA now. Jake Voskuhl was out of Michigan.
No,
Uh,
UConn.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm thinking about that was in Michigan. I'm thinking of Dugan Fife. Anyway, same guy. Vasco really didn't pan out in the NBA, but you know, it was one of those things that was more of a give me what you can for, because nobody was going to overpay for Scotty at that point, considering they would have to pay him eventually down the road.
Voskuhl, great head of hair. He was on that team with Khalid El Amin and Rip Hamilton.
Yes.
That those UConn that first wave of really good UConn franchises. So we've seen the 10 hours. We've seen maybe a new look into Michael Jordan that we hadn't seen before. The debate between Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, all three of those guys, I think that you see an intensity out of Jordan that you don't see with LeBron that you did see in Kobe. I think is kind of how you can mix and match or kind of compare those three right now when you look at just how they were on the court and you want to look for comparisons or differences.
Yeah, I don't really think there's a comparison. I think Michael is in the clubhouse with the lead. The championships are one thing. I think statistically, Michael was a beast of both ends of the floor. And he could be a real tough matchup problem defensively. Kobe basically shot his way into what you would deem greatness. Field goal percentage is nowhere near what Michael's was. Kobe worked hard. He was a good, tough player. And LeBron's game is just completely different than those two. And his numbers don't even come close to what Michael has been able to do. Different era, by the way, uh, for both of those guys, all three of them. And that has a lot to do with it. I look at those teams that the Bulls matched up with in the playoffs, whether it was in the second or third round of conference finals or even the finals. You look at some of those rosters; those were some good players that they were facing. I don't necessarily know if I could say the same thing about some of the teams that LeBron faced, and certainly some of the teams that Kobe faced, where they were that stacked. Back then, you needed two guys to be a champion. Now you need three at least in order to be a champion. And it's a little bit of a different game to play. It's not as physical. I just think the toll would have taken a real severe chunk out of Kobe and or LeBron had they played in that era.
I think one of the things that a lot of people learned last night was about Steve Kerr and his upbringing and what happened to his dad back when he
Yeah.
was back in the 80s, which I, I had read that story prior. I knew that was coming, and I was a little surprised to see the amount of people that were shocked by that story, just given how outspoken Steve Kerr is these days on politics. Kind of the back, one of the reasons why he probably has an interest in political agendas.
Well, he comes from obviously a well-educated family. Uh, both family members, parents, are educators. I know Steve just a little bit. He and I have a mutual friend, and I got to know him when he was a player, and I've crossed paths with him since then. Passionate guy. He knows his lane, but there's an inner confidence about himself saying, don't take me for granted. And I think it was proven in the documentary. I think the story about his dad was timely though, and even how the question was posed to him: Did you and Michael ever talk about your dads? Both ended up being murdered. They didn't, but the one thing that I remember about Steve Kerr, and they showed it in the doc about the fact where Michael said, "Hey, they're going to double me. I'm coming to you." He said, "I'll be ready." That's all you needed to know about what Steve Kerr was about. And now to see him evolve into a coach, I think every player who ever plays for Steve Kerr will have a greater appreciation about him because, a lot of these guys, they don't really know about these former players. I mean, these coaches who are former players. I'll give you a good example. The reason why Dennis Rodman and Phil Jackson seemed to mesh, Phil Jackson was Dennis Rodman back in the day. Long, gangly arms. He was a real nightmare to play against defensively. Not a big scorer. He could score. But if Phil Jackson came in the game, he was coming in to guard somebody. And he was, like I said, a big, gangly guy. It really made your night difficult. And he was a free spirit himself. So I think he and Dennis probably got each other from that standpoint.
You mentioned Dennis Rodman, the story they told about him with his transition into wrestling, as you mentioned earlier that he was maybe focused on other things after that '98 season. I'm a wrestling fan, you know that. And I remember flipping back and forth between Nitro and Raw every single Monday back during the mid to late '90s. I did not know that Dennis Rodman went on Nitro during the NBA Finals. I'm well aware that he had that tag match, him and Hulk Hogan against Karl Malone and Diamond Dallas Page. Like I remember that storyline. I remember him attacking DDP. I didn't know that it was during the finals between game 3 and 4. He just jumped on a plane to go fly to WCW Monday Nitro. Imagine, I can't, I'm trying to think of an athlete today that would go and do something like that and the backlash that would come. I guess of the meltdown that we saw Antonio Brown have this past year, maybe somebody like him would have done that. But I feel like in today's era with social media, that that would take a lot of it would take a lot of balls to go in the middle of a playoff series and go
Well,
do something else.
apparently, Dennis has them. Um, you know, you just touched on something about social media. Social media would have changed a lot of things on that Chicago Bull team. I think in Rodman's case, it wasn't the fact, I mean, what do you do to a guy if he misses practice in the finals? What do you do? You run him? You bench him? I mean, this is one of your best players, so you roll with it. And you just take a deep breath because at the end of the day, he still was one of your best players, and he proved it the following night that he played. And so my question would have been, what would have been worse, Dennis Rodman playing or going and being involved in a wrestling event, or Michael going out playing 36 the day before the final game? I mean, both these guys know their bodies better than anybody. I think again, it was more of a media thing where we were all appalled by it, and rightfully so, I might add, because we never seen it before. But I'm sure there are people who have crossed that line before that we just haven't heard about. I think it was because it was publicized so much because he was in a different city. That meant a lot to it as well.
Which one of those two do you think would have been on Twitter or Instagram if between Jordan and Rodman? Which one was more likely to set up a Twitter or
Oh,
Instagram account?
Rodman by far, because Rodman craves attention. I think Michael had made the deal with himself that because of who he was never going to be in a position to honk his horn like we see what Dennis Rodman was able to do. So I think it would have been certainly Rodman in the clubhouse with the league. We're talking about a guy who, if Twitter had broken out, he'd have millions of followers. I mean, he'd be up there. I mean, who has the most followers now on Twitter that we know? Who do you think has the most followers?
Most on Twitter. I thought it Obama. Is he the? Does he have
He'd
the
be
most on Twitter?
somewhere. He'd be somewhere in the Obama vicinity as far as people want to see. But the other thing with that is, when does that act grow old?
Yeah.
When you, oh geez, man, what now? So you have a very small window where you can do that, and I think Rodman would have been the guy.
I feel like it's almost. Do you remember when Charlie Sheen had his big when he had his
Yeah,
big rise and fall? I feel like that it would have been something similar to that.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that these things have a short shelf life. Your 15 minutes of fame and glory is what it comes down to. It just translates now into pushing sin and how you get it out there. But I think that all these guys go through it. Very few guys have the staying power. I think the ones like Brady and Tiger and people like that they're selective in what they do and when they say it, which is why we're always intrigued by what they do, which is why they have huge followers on social media also.
Let's move on to baseball. Let's move on to the MLB as we're still awaiting the start of the 2020 season. This past week, the AP put out an article, a 67-page draft of Major League Baseball's proposed 2020 operations manual was sent out to all of the teams. Among some of the highlights here, team personnel will be banned from eating at restaurants on road trips. Mascots will be banned from the field. High fives, fist bumps, bat boys, and bat girls will not be allowed. Spitting will not be allowed. And the in the new rules of baseball in 2020, and one of the another one, showers are going to be discouraged at the ballpark. So we're getting back into kind of little league where you show up in your uniform and then you leave in your uniform and you go take a shower back at your own house or apartment.
I don't think many of these rules will fly. I know this whole little league notion. The only thing I can compare it to is in basketball, where teams would be on the bus in their uniform, but they would bring their clothes to the arena, shower and change, and go home or go on the road or whatever. I don't see that happening. There are a few other things. The spitting thing, are you gonna? A guy's been doing it all his life, and then you're gonna say, don't do it. It's gonna take some time, and I think we have to be very careful on the safety police. How do you regulate that? Because somebody's going to tell you to go bleep off, if you keep harboring the notion. Now, I know you want to set some examples and do some things the right way, but I think you have to be in a position of using common sense and hoping the athletes will be able to find the things that actually are workable compared to impossible. So that thing was a proposal.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I would say a third of that stuff won't stick.
Yeah. And when you get into the whole, if you're saying no high fives, no fist bumps, but then when you're on the field, you're allowed to tag a guy out.
Yeah,
So
there's
there,
just too many other pitfalls to it.
yeah,
But you know what? I think, Joe, they had to put something on paper. Again, it's a proposal. There's no mandate. There's nothing etched in stone. I think the players will obviously have a chance to respond also. So I look at this situation as being one that's still fluid. Ideas are still welcome. I think what you're going to have to find is welcome and realistic ideas that can actually be applied. Because if you expect an umpire to enforce those rules when they're trying to figure out balls and strikes, I think you're putting too much on them as well. So who's going to regulate this? Who's going to enforce it? How long is the grace period before we do enforce it? I mean, there's so many things that go into this. That's why I say, everybody, let's just take a deep breath here before we start thinking this is how it's going to be from now on.
As a member of the Cardinals broadcast, have you been told anything? Have you heard anything? Has there been any kind of discussion as far as what to expect or what things might look like on your end?
No. And you know what? I kind of took the approach until they asked me. There's no reason for me to get it. Just let me know what you're thinking or where we're headed with it. Let me know what time I need to be there and let me know what you want me to do. This is so out of everybody's hands. It's only my hope that the people who are making a decision are consulting with people who do this on some sort of formal basis to get an idea of what would work and what be challenging and what wouldn't work at all. But no, they haven't said anything. And, people who I report to have been pretty transparent about keeping me informed. But, the bottom line is, and I think John Mozeliak said it early in the game, I just don't know. And I think that still applies for a lot of people with regard to where this thing is headed. So we just have to wait and be patient and just hope that things work out. But I think we're going to have to have a little bit more of a broad scope on where we take this next.
Are we expecting to hear anything this week from the player side?
I think you'll probably hear something. They got about till the end of the month to get something figured out. So they'll go back and forth. And just because we don't hear about them doesn't mean they're not talking. And I think that's important to remember. I would rather them not talk. I would rather for them to just get in the room and figure it out and then just let us know, because the public bantering back and forth, and it's basically been the players doing more of the talking. I think one of the concerns, though, is what numbers financially are we supposed to go by? Because a lot of players have looked at the most recent statement about players or owners losing 640,000 a day or per game. They look at that with a jaundiced eye on how they actually came up with that number. There's already been people saying not even close. So we don't know what the numbers are, and I think that's one of the issues with the players. They want to know what the real reasonable numbers are, not necessarily hard numbers, because everybody does their books differently, but something that goes into a mainframe that they can actually disseminate and have a legitimate response to.
I'm going to jump around a little bit here. I'm going to jump just to flip 4 and 5 as the NHL has also come out today. Greg Wyshynski and Emily Kaplan of ESPN had an article up on ESPN.com right now about some of the keys to plays resuming in 2020. And one of those ideas that they have in place is a 24 team postseason. So they would just be jumping kind of right into a 24 team postseason, 3 weeks of training camp, and then going into the playoffs to restart the hockey season. As that would be kind of they would have, I guess, 2 hub cities instead of 4 hub cities. So they're sticking with the, we're gonna put the guys all in one city. We're gonna have 1, 2, 3 arenas in that city that they can play at, and we're gonna get as many games done as possible to wrap this season up.
Well, I guess here's my question. Is this supposed to be part of the playoffs? Because you mentioned 24. There's more than 24 teams in the NHL. So what happens to those other teams? Do they just go home for the summer? I mean,
I guess
uh,
you send those 7 teams home and you give them the top 7 picks in the draft, right?
yeah, I guess that works. But you know what? I guess if you're looking late in the year and there's 2 points on the schedule that you think you have a shot at, now all of a sudden that team wasn't going to be on the schedule. And I understand you have to change the schedule anyway. It's probably best. Um, but I think they need to have, I think a tournament would probably serve better. And because they've determined that they're not going to have fans. That's unfortunate. They feel like they can't have fans, even if this thing progresses where there is a comfort level. To isolate themselves like that, I think is going to be a real challenge. Just like I think the logistics of baseball, when they say, well, you can't have visitors on the road, and okay, we'll see how that works. So I really look at the NHL. It's a little bit more forward than maybe I think you would expect, but I think it's something they feel that they have better control over. So when you look at that situation, you say, well, okay, they try to do the best they could with the resources. Remember, they don't have sheets of ice to go out and play on and practice on. Guys can go play catch in baseball, go hit in the cage. In basketball, there's an open gym. In the NHL, you got to be on ice. You got to have a rink. You got to do all the other things that requires more people. So I'm gonna wait and see how this works. But you know what? Just get it started and be cautious about it. And I think that's what they're trying to do.
Depending on where these hubs are, obviously the weather plays a factor. I'm guessing they're not going to have these hubs down in Florida or Arizona where it's going to start getting really, really hot in June and July. But as I talked about, I had Lou Korak on my show this weekend, and he was saying, even in St. Louis, I mean, you were there during the Stanley Cup games, even in St. Louis in June, the weather gets really hot, and you start looking at the condition of the ice there at a place like Enterprise, and you can't play games in July and August and expect to have a nice sheet of ice.
Well, yeah, you can, and here's why: you won't have the fans in the building,
Okay.
and the heat that the fans generate and the humidity—that's the big issue. I don't think you have an ice problem if nobody's in the rink. As hot as it might be outside, they can maintain a comfortable temperature because they don't have anybody else in the building. So I don't think that's going to be as big of a factor as maybe we would have thought. But your point is a valid one. If it wasn't for that, if we were in the June, yeah, would have a hard time doing it. But now that they've said we're not going to have fans, then I don't think it really has an impact on the weather here. And in most rinks, I think they could keep it cool enough where you'd have good ice.
We want to remind people they're listening to the debut or watching the debut of Lunchtime with Claibs and Joe right here on ClaibsOnline, as we're broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as we plan to do so each and every Monday for the we'll just make it a regular thing. I mean, we'll add it into the rotation of everything else that we have going for you right now.
We got nothing else going. The
No,
only thing we got to do is make sure we have some legitimate lunch next week.
I'm telling you
Uh,
what, we get once these restaurants in Missouri start opening up. Who knows? I'm in Illinois. Who knows when the hell any of this is going to be opening up in Illinois? But we could take this show on the road once restaurants are running at full capacity. There's no reason why we can't do that.
I think we're on to something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's brought to you by Ameren, Illinois, and Munganess St. Louis Acura. Also, Town and Style. Claibs, what do you have? What are you working on for the next Town and Style column that you're doing?
Well, we've got our most recent one, and it comes out Wednesday. Danny Meyer of Union Square Hospitality Group, also of Shake Shack fame, is. I did a little Q&A with him. We had a whole lot of fun. And it's different than the podcast that we did. I want to make sure people, I already heard that. No, this is different. So I've got some fun questions for him that we're going to do. We got some other fun people that we've already talked to. We're just waiting on the right time to unveil them. And I came up with an idea for a guy today that I'm going to do. I just got to call him and ask him. But it's been fun. It's a really nice magazine, and you can go online and read it. It's at your local Snooks and Deerbergs, and any place where good things are sold. It's a really nice magazine, so I would suggest people go out, not just to read my stuff, but some other good stories that are in there.
The final thing I wanted to get to, Jim Trotter of the NFL Network, he tweeted out the other day that NFL owners are going to vote this week on a resolution that it would improve a team's draft position if it hires a person of color as a head coach or general manager. Currently, there are only 2 black GMs and 4 minority head coaches in the NHL or in the NFL, which matches a 17-year low. Again, this has to be voted on by 2/3 of the owners to even pass. That's probably unlikely, but just the idea being thrown out there of improving your draft position based on the race of the person you hire for a front office GM job or a head coaching job, where does it say that we're at in the NFL?
He says the NFL is in bad shape. One of the reasons why I don't follow the NFL as much as I used to is I don't like the way they do business. The whole minority hiring thing has always been an issue. And I think what they're trying to do is say, hey, look, we're trying to do something. You're so deep in the hole in how you deal with that, it's embarrassing to even bring it up. And I know some people say, well, it's a start. Well, I don't know, is it a start or not? Because I think the impact that it has league wide is something I'm not comfortable with. There's got to be a better way to do it. And I know some teams would try to incorporate more minorities in their intern programs and things of that nature. But I think that this current setup and what they're trying to do to entice people to hire somebody because you get a draft pick. I'm not sure if I'm on board with that yet. There's got to be another way. I don't have an answer right now, and apparently the NFL doesn't have one either. But it's one that I think should be explored again, and maybe have some more people who don't look like them in the room to even explore some other options where it doesn't become offensive to people of color, like it is come to people who aren't black, who aren't a minority. I think people who don't look like me probably say, what the hell is this all about? And then you have people who do look like me and say, what the hell is this all about? So nobody's happy with it as far as I'm concerned. And I think maybe that's not the right term. Maybe they're just not comfortable with it. I'm not comfortable with it. I think that there's got to be a better solution than this, because you're basically selling your soul in order to enhance your lie instead of interviewing people who are qualified and who deserve an opportunity. And that's what we're missing here.
As we wrap things up here on the first edition of Lunch with Claibs and Joe, we mentioned it at the start. Who do you have coming up again this week for your one-on-one interviews?
Well, we're going to have a chance to visit with Derek Gould later in the week, Mark Russo of the Doobie Brothers, Porter Carroll Jr. of Hall & Oates, and of course, Clarence Gaines Jr. and Dr. Rick Lehman will join us. I wanted to get his thoughts on the proposal that Major League Baseball has floated out there to see what he thinks can fly or not. So we've got that coming up this week. I always suggest everybody to do is just keep clicking in and checking us out. We always have some fresh stuff up there. We have a lot of fun with you. You're having fun. We got a lot of other people that are involved, and we're looking to add on some people down the road here. So this will be the place for everybody to come to be informed, to be entertained, and just get their mind off of whatever else is going on. And believe it or not, you might even learn something here. So we'll have a good time with it no matter what.
I want to let people know. So every day we have been putting up this day in Cardinal history. Today we take you back to the year 2000. Mark McGwire, he passes Mickey Mantle on the all-time home run list. Tomorrow we have classic Cardinal audio from 1962. On this day in Cardinal history, you're going to hear the voice of Harry Carey giving the call for a moment in 1962. We don't travel too far for May 20th. That'll be on Wednesday, just 2018 for the memory there. 2009 is where we go back on Thursday, and then on Friday, I gotta say, on Friday, I'm not sure where we go with that because I sent you two memories for that day to record, and I'm gonna be honest, Claibs, I haven't listened that far ahead yet, so I'm not sure which direction we go in on May 22nd. So it'll be either 1962 again or 1976. So something for everybody. We go all over the
Stand
place.
by. That's all you can do is stand by.
Yeah, we go all over the place with this day in Cardinal history, and they're all up there. It's available on Spotify and iTunes, and everything is right there for you to click on and go back. You can go all the way back. We started this on March 26th, the day that was supposed to be Cardinals opening day, and you can go and find all of this day in Cardinal history for the last 8 weeks now that we've been doing it. So plenty of stuff for people to go back and watch.
All right.
Claibs, enjoy your late lunch if that's where you're headed right now. We'll see everybody right here next Monday. But as we said, we're always available for you right there on ClaibsOnline.